Hey, welcome. Welcome to Wednesday walkthrough. I'm Tom Neiman, and today we're going to walk through just a couple of things. It'll be a little bit different than past sessions where I've walked through some books and other ideas. Today we're actually going to take some time to walk through just some recent experiences I've had with watercolor journaling, and then I'm going to walk through a little study of an Edward Bannister painting. And it's actually this painting right here, which is on my iPad. Hopefully you can see it. If not, we'll bring it up again in just a little bit and show you a clearer image. But we're going to look to get that study done. And we've covered George Bannister before. He was an artist that had been recommended by one of my subscribers, and he kind of fits within the tonalist movement, but he's an interesting character for sure. So what I want to do is first I'm going to switch my camera so you can see my messy studio. Just want to share with you that I spent some time on a guided hike within the Delaware Water Gap National Recreation Area, which is right near our home here in the Poconos, and drove up near Milford, Pennsylvania, and did a guided hike on a Friday afternoon, last Friday afternoon, all the way up near Milford, and we did the Cliff Walk or Cliff Walk Park Trail, and we saw a couple of interesting sights there, including Hackers Falls and the actual Cliff Walk Trail, which was kind of interesting. So we were all the way up toward the northern part of the park, up in this area just southwest of Milford, Pennsylvania, on the Pennsylvania side. So it was a little bit of a drive because we're all the way down here near Stroudsburg, but it was worth it. It was a great experience, and the ranger that helped us out, Ranger Zach, actually highlighted some areas that might be good locations to plein air paint within, and just thought that was really helpful. Oops. Spent a little bit of extra time mapping it out here for me, and we're definitely going to take advantage of that probably throughout the spring, summer, and fall. We're still in winter here, right in the middle of February. So in any event, just wanted to share that with you. It was a free event. I follow their Facebook page on Delaware Water Gap Recreation Area, and they post events out there from time to time, and I finally had the opportunity after waiting for a while to take advantage of it. One more thing I wanted to share with you, my watercolor journaling. So it's coming along. Today I worked on this morning before work. It's a painting of a tree in our yard. Actually took video footage of it over the past couple days because the sun's been rising in a spot where it backlights, provides a nice little backlit kind of dynamic here with this tree. This is a special tree because our 17-year-old twins, when they were younger, used to spend time climbing this tree. So, felt compelled to take note of the nice backlit, kind of lighting that was created. And I think I captured it pretty well. Always can do things a little bit better, but like the way it came out for sure. And I do want to show you some additional work. Just hold on one second. I have been spending quite a bit of time, within the journal. Some cases, plein air painting like this right in the backyard. Did this little study in our dining room. This is actually my wife Janine's piece here. It's where cookies or cake can be stored safely. She's also become pretty adept at germinating plants from seeds, and also you know taking growths like this and actually getting the roots going. So I figured I would just paint this. I didn't have a lot of time. I had work-related meetings. Did this little painting of our girl Holly, and I've posted most of these, not necessarily all of them, but most of them. But this is a great tool, this whole process, because it is very mobile. You could easily lug this along with you if you don't have a lot of space. And it also cuts down on costs. So, if you spend a lot of time with oil paints, that could be quite costly. This helps you get the work in. Painted this plein air. It's the roots and the main trunk of one of our tall pines in the backyard not too long ago as well. And I'm sharing it because my hope is that maybe there's somebody that'll watch this video and hoping maybe there's somebody that'll watch this video and get an idea for how that could be useful in someone's painting practice. All right, so we're going to move on to our demo, and I have most of my palette set up. We're going to cover the Ed Bannister painting, and a little bit of a different palette than normal. I have a little bit of alizarin crimson, Payne's gray, ultramarine blue. Those two are commonly featured on my palette. I have sap green, Van Dyke brown, which has been on there more and more. Have raw sienna, and then India yellow. I'm gonna put a little titanium white on there, and for now that'll be it. In the meantime, I'm going to go ahead and get you set up so you're looking down at my watercolor journal. This is also unique too. I haven't done very many paintings using black gesso in my watercolor journal, just a few. But we're going to do that. And if you haven't seen any of my other videos where I featured this, I learned this from, there's a couple of painters on YouTube that do this, but this again is another convenient and less expensive way to practice painting with oil paints. It essentially is easy to store, less expensive than canvas, less work intensive than creating your own panels. It's just a heavy grade multimedia paper or sketch paper, in some cases even watercolor paper, covered with a layer or two of gesso, in this case black gesso. And when I do these studies, I try to intentionally get in the mindset of play and experimentation. I am not a scientific painter, nor will I ever be, I don't believe. Just I go with my intuition and try and figure things out as I go. So I'm going to continue to adjust this, hopefully, so I can get the whole plane in view here, and also my palette. It might be at a slight angle, but hopefully it'll work for you. Now, this is an 11 by 14 sheet of paper, and my palette is a dollar store pizza cooking sheet. So again, trying to be as economical as possible, particularly with efforts like this to create studies of great works. And today, once again, we're going to be covering Edward Bannister. And I thought it was fitting for a number of reasons. I haven't covered him in a while. And there's this beautiful painting, which I, for the life of me, can't remember the name of, but this beautiful, simple painting where he has, a couple of masses of trees in a field, little mountain range in the background, dynamic sky with all kinds of clouds moving throughout the sky, and then a little body of water and some reeds popping up. So lots of times he'll do bucolic scenes like this, farm scenes, and there'll be cows and that sort of thing. I figured for tonight, in the interest of time, we would do one of his simpler compositions. And again, my objective is never to, scientifically cover these paintings and match it precisely. It's more of an experiment in trying to explore and find my own way, using my own unique, intuitive way of mixing paints and get as close as I possibly can without too much struggle. I'm not interested in struggling. I want this to be fun. I want it to be a fun, healthy diversion. So there's my little tray. I'm going to get some brushes to go along with my linseed oil, and we'll get started here. All right. So I'll probably need to snag another brush or two, but I'm mainly going with some small and medium-sized flat brushes and round brushes for the most part. And they're all pretty beat up, which is totally okay. So I'm gonna get a little bit of white on my palette. And definitely use a fair amount of that. Okay. So I kind of have to remember in my mind that with oil paints, we're going to start with our dark values first. I've been doing a lot of watercolor painting lately. The good news is that we're starting with this black background, so it's a little bit easier to fill that dark space, and I think it'll help this come together a little bit more quickly. We shall see. So I'm going to mix together a little bit of, while my surface is clear, I'll mix on camera here a little bit of Van Dyke Brown and a little bit of, we'll go with Payne's Gray. And a little bit of sap green mixed together. Okay. We're going to go ahead and a little bit of linseed oil in there and thin that out. Halfway, 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 not being very scientific at all. He has this mass of trees. It's interesting. There's a lot of interesting things about Edward Bannister, but he was born in Canada, and I've covered a couple of his paintings before, and I'll try to include links if I could remember to those in the notes for this video. But he was born in Canada. He was of African American descent, and he was an abolitionist at a time, when I'm sure that wasn't an easy thing to do. So, very interesting, and he made his way into the painting world. He won some contests and some awards, and earned some big-time notoriety in the art world. and you know, his artwork is on display in some major exhibits within some museums around the country. He lived most of his life, in his adult life, in New England, and you know, we're talking in the 1800s. So he was actually born on November 2nd, 1828, and he lived a fairly long life. He lived to January 9th, 1901. So, incredible artist. Must have had, I would say, a fair amount of bravery, if not a lot of bravery, to make his way at that time as a painter. All right, so I am just very sloppily putting some of these dark shapes in. I'm just thinking about the shapes, trying to match, roughly speaking, proportion and shape, starting with the darks and actually kind of working backwards here because of this dark background. Once again, very unscientific. Not interested in really breaking this down, not interested in the color science, just want to intuitively play and come close to mimicking or mirroring this particular painting, and we should be able to wrap this up. Just based upon past experience, I'll get it close to where I want it to be within about 20 to 30 minutes. All right, I'm gonna go with a little bit of transparent red oxide, and we're gonna mix that with the Payne's Gray. This is a slightly different palette, I mentioned that. Also some raw sienna that I normally use. So I might have some mess ups here. There's a fairly good chance because you just never know unless you experience mixing different colors how they're going to interact with one another. So it might make logical sense to mix, let's say, a yellow and a blue to make green. But if you don't have experience mixing India yellow with a different brand of sap green than you normally use, you might get a totally different outcome than you expect. Yeah, so this is going to be essentially a master copy of this Ed Bannister painting, and it'll come together. I know it's hard to see. Right now I'm just blocking in some of the darker shapes within the painting, and then I'll start working from back to front in just a moment. So I'll actually start working in the sky with one of my scummy brushes here. And I'm gonna get some paper towel actually. Pretty important to have some paper towel around, which I know I do. I just moved stuff around earlier and lost track of it. Let's see. Yeah, so on this hike that I was on this week, it's interesting. There is a bunch of waterfalls that are connected up in that Milford, Pennsylvania area. So there's Hackers Falls, and in addition to that, there's a bunch of others. And I hope to hike to them all. All right, so we're going to mix a little bit of the Payne's Gray. Let me get more oil on my brush here with the white. And I'm going to get a couple of different puddles mixed up. So I'm going to get a darker gray and then a lighter gray and then a lighter gray mixed in with a little bit of raw sienna. So that's my strategy here for the sky. I'm going to have 3 colors, essentially. And then occasionally we'll mix in almost pure white. So we're going to have lighter gray with a little bit of raw sienna mixed in, a lighter gray, and then a darker gray. And that's my strategy for the sky. And I'm going to go ahead and get my third round brush in play here. And we're going to start with this darker gray. Get a little bit more going. Here we go. So he's got some cloud shapes, and that might be a little too light, and that's okay. I could come back. I'm gonna have to bring some darker low lights into this for sure. He's got the page, and he's got a few here. Here, okay. Now I'm going to start going a little bit lighter. I think that might be slightly too light. There we go. So there's actually a few folks that are on the live stream. Quite often there's nobody or one or two people, and folks will view after the fact, it seems. I'm painting in the Poconos right now. Maybe if you don't mind, share with me where you're watching from. Be curious to see that. So I'm originally from the great state of New Jersey, and my wife and I moved out here to the Poconos a little bit over 20 years ago, and it's been home ever since. You know, and for years I had every intention of painting and creating art, but just was so busy, never really got around to it all that much. Fortunately, lately I've been doing it a lot. Started just before COVID, and I got a little bit of blue into my gray, darken it a little bit, and been painting pretty consistently ever since. All right. So we're going to keep texturizing these clouds a little bit and playing with the edges of the shapes. And they won't look like clouds very much here until I bring it all together. So I'm just thinking in terms of shapes and values, and not looking to create a carbon copy of Ed Bannister's painting here, but just a likeness. Whereas if you were a big Ed Bannister fan, you might recognize this painting. All right. Starting with the darks, moving to the lights, and starting thin, and then we'll get a little bit thicker as we go with the paint. And those that are watching that are into oil painting, you might be familiar with that. That's pretty standard process. So here we have a little bit of a tree line, and the foundation of the sky has been started, and then we're going to work our way forward. In the mid-ground, there'll be some hills that'll break through over the horizon, and there'll be some fields, and there'll be a little body of water toward the very closest portion of the foreground. All right. I know it's hard to see. You know, one of the interesting things here is I'm painting on paper that's painted with some black gesso. And that's part of the reason why it's difficult to see. All right, so I'm going to create a little pile. I'm going to bring it, hold it here, of a more bluish light gray. We're going to use this in a couple of spots. We're going to use this in part of the sky near the horizon, where some blue skies are breaking through. And we're also going to use it, but we'll gray it out a little bit to help create the indication of a little bit of the mountain range. And we'll get touches of this color throughout the sky, the same way that, Ed Bannister did in his painting. Okay, and we'll also get it into the water as well. So it'll be indicative of some of the reflections. Okay. Don't want to overdo it. All right, let's see. Get some of that here. I definitely don't want to mess with the foreground yet until I feel comfortable with the tonal qualities of the sky. I'm going to get a little bit of a lighter gray, almost white, laid in certain spots. Normally I would hold off and wait a little bit longer, but I want to get a sense for what this is going to look like with some of the lighter highlights mixed in before I get too far along. So if you Google Edward Bannister, you'll find all kinds of, or whatever your favorite search engine is, if you search for him, you're going to find all kinds of interesting information. You know, and these turn of the century artists, no matter where they're from or what their background is like, is what I tend to be drawn to. You know, the 1800s through the early 1900s, and mostly American painters. I mean, occasionally, you know, I'll take the time to cover an impressionist like a Monet or what have you. But for the most part, when I do these study the greats type paintings where I'm doing a master copy, it'll be painters from this era. It's just something about them that I'm drawn to. One thing I know consciously that I've figured out is that I'm drawn to the simplicity with which they tackle the shapes within the paintings, but also the mood that they tend to evoke in that tonalist movement. There's just something about it, whether it's George and S or any of the others, Charles Warne. All right, so I'm going to move on a little bit, and I'm going to switch to my flat brush here. And I'm going to get a little bit of my linseed oil on there and wipe it out. And I'm going to move to the foreground here. So this is going to be mostly earth tones now. And we're going to lighten it up a little bit. The vertical planes associated with the trees and the stone rows in this painting, the original is an Ed Bannister painting, they tend to be, you know, the darkest, and you'll see that in the landscape when you look at it. If you're painting plein air from a distance, you know, a wide-ranging landscape like this, you'd see the same dynamic in play in most situations. So they're going to be the darkest value shapes, and things will really start to lighten up now that we have some of the sky in and we start to get some of these ground planes and water planes in. You'll start to see more of the painting composition, and hopefully it'll start to make a little bit more sense. So we're going to use mainly the earth tones, so sap green, raw sienna, and Van Dyke brown. And it's going to start a little dark, but it'll get a little bit lighter as we go. A bit more linseed oil in there. I want to stay thin initially, and then as the painting builds up and as the paint dries a little bit here on my surface, we'll start to use thicker paint. I also want to be careful not to use too much linseed oil mixed in. That's how I'm thinning my paints, because I do not want to use any sort of harsh chemical or astringent chemical. I tend to be pretty sensitive, so yeah, I wouldn't want to irritate my lungs or my skin. All right, so the water here is, the water line is going to start right about here and below. And I didn't size this perfectly well, so that'll become evident in a little bit. I think the space that I allocated for the water will be slightly smaller in proportion to the other shapes here than in the original. But once again, I'm okay with that. I'm not looking for a scientific reproduction here. Just looking to get a sense for how this great painter may have approached tackling this painting. Get close, mainly using my intuition. Yes, painting is therapeutic. It is therapy for me, so yeah, I regret the fact that I stopped some years ago, but I'm grateful for the fact that I started again and have the space and time and resources to learn. Grateful for online teachers that kind of helped me bridge the gap too, because when I was an art major in college, I had some great teachers that I had access to, but they weren't really into this type of painting, which is what I was always drawn to. They were more into modern art and installation type art and that sort of thing. I think that was part of the reason why I got discouraged. I just didn't see a pathway to learning how to create the type of art that I wanted to create. And yeah, I was too young, too stupid and ignorant to figure it out on my own. But now, with all the wonderful resources that are out there, folks like Stuart Davies and Kyle Buckland and Eric Rhodes, with all the wonderful artists that he brings onto his channel, there's opportunities to learn, almost too many opportunities, and it's really helped me. Stuart Davies helped me kind of make the plunge and start oil painting to begin with. Kyle Buckland, a Virginia-based painter, helped me bridge the gap to plein air painting, which I absolutely love. And hope to get some better quality videos out on the channel related to plein air painting in the future. But this is coming together a little bit. You can kind of get a sense for what the painting is going to look like. It's going to shift quite a bit here in just a bit. We're going to get the main shapes in for the most part, and we're going to get the shapes within the shapes, as I like to kind of put it, in just a moment. And it'll really start to take shape. Don't want to worry about too much detail at this point. We just want to get those main shapes in and get as close as we can to the values that we want to see kind of as part of the painting structure. And if you're not familiar with those terms, that's fine. I wasn't either, but the shapes are the shapes. So circle, square, rectangle, triangle, and then some of the non-standard shapes. The values are the lights and the darks. And what I'm trying to kind of fumble my way through here is the relationship between those values. There we go. I'm going to adjust my light a little bit, and I think that's probably closer. There's some glare. It's always a struggle. My lighting system is, I'm basically a caveman when it comes to, lighting. All right, so we're going to get some dark grays in. To where the body of water is. And so what's being reflected here in the water is a little bit of the land, a little bit of the sky. And we're starting with actually probably the middle tone here for the water. It's not the darkest and it's not the lightest for sure. And I'm definitely proving my point that I've mentioned a couple times now. I'm really not approaching this from a scientific perspective. I'm kind of just slapping this together using my intuition. And that's just how I am usually. I look calm and cool and collected and thoughtful, but I'm usually flying by the seat of my pants in most of the stuff that I'm doing. All right, now I'm going to get a little bit of a darker gray mixed up with a little bit of my sap green mixed in. And my paint's gray is a little stiff. I don't know if that's typically the case or if it's just because how I've stored it or what have you. But we're going to get a little bit of a darker, we'll get some blue in there too. That'll darken it up a little bit. And some of our Van Dyke brown. There we go. We definitely have to get some darker reflections in this water or it just won't pop. And ideally I would have started getting these shapes in, these darker shapes in, but sometimes it just doesn't work out the way it should. You got to find ways to work around challenges, and it's much harder to paint light over dark than it is dark over light, generally speaking, with a few exceptions. So it definitely is easier when we start dark with oil paints. It's the exact opposite I'm learning with watercolors, being a watercolor novice, but learning quickly. Again, thanks to online teachers for the most part. Hoping to take some workshops this summer. All right. So I'm going to go back to some lighter gray, and we're going to slowly work that into the water. We got a little bit of blue in there. White. The white is definitely, titanium white sometimes is very stiff out of the tube, so I'm going to get some linseed oil in there and some ultramarine blue mixed into my light gray. And we're going to start getting little indications of that in the water here, just to lighten it up. Again, just thinking of the shapes, so I'll bring the original into view. And you can see it looks much lighter on camera, I think, than it is in real life, but we have this reflection of the tree mass. We have some reflection of the greens and that sort of thing through there, which are just roughed in. As is always the case when you're doing reflections in water, the values will tend to be lighter than the shape that they're reflecting, and the colors will tend to be a little less saturated, meaning a little less intense. All right, so this piece kind of juts out a little bit here. a little cove there, and then goes up, and there's like another little piece jutting out here in the picture, and we're not going to worry about doing it too much, and we'll shore that up by bringing lighter highlights in, firming up some of the lowlights, particularly the lowlights on the bank, in just a moment. So what I'm going to do now is we're going to go into the background. I'm going to mix up what I think will be a little bit of a purpley gray. So I'm going to use some of this alizarin crimson and a little bit of blue. And we're going to lighten it up a little bit. A little bit more alizarin crimson. There we go. So we have like a purpley gray. How's that for color science? Yeah, I would not win any awards as a colorist, I don't think, ever. Just because, at least at this point in my painting journey, it's just something that it hasn't really kind of latched in. The best resource that I've come across so far is Color and Light, a guide for the realist painter by James Gurney. It's been really helpful. And then again, watching some of the instructors on YouTube. We're going to get this in, and I'm probably going to have to blue that out a little bit. It's a little too gray, and I need a little bit more blue to push that back. There we go. Some indication of hills in the background. Maybe put some preliminary sky holes in, make it look like there's little cuttings there. I'm gonna get a little bit more blue in spots. All right, and that's intended to be a little indication of some mountains in the background. We're going to get some of this worked into the water too, why not? Color and light bounce around in nature. Sometimes it won't make logical sense because you might see light, colored light reflecting off of a cloud, off of another cloud, and then off of the water, and it might not make logical sense in as far as where a particular color is coming from. So sometimes you just kind of have to let it go and not think, and let your intuition kind of lead to you putting a color down that might otherwise not make much sense. All right, so I'm looking for a paper towel. I'm going to move back up to the sky. I'll wipe out my flat brush. I'm going to wipe out this big round brush. And amazing, Bob Ross tossed $2. That's hilarious. I like it. This is actually a copy, a master copy, very loose master copy of an Ed Bannister painting. And we're going to intensify some of the colors here in a moment. We've been just laying in some of the basic shapes up until now. And we're going to get, I mean, intensify is really not the right word here because it is a tonalist style painting, but we're going to get some of the highlight colors mixed in, including this mixture of raw sienna, white, and Payne's gray mixed into the clouds. He took the time to do it. I'm going to try and do it. That's one of the interesting things about clouds. You know, if you ask a lot of folks, what colors do you see in clouds? And folks that never really have taken the time to observe or learn to observe colors or clouds, or, you know, maybe they're not into things like that. Yeah, they might tell you, well, they're white, or maybe white and gray, but there's all kinds of colors in clouds, and I'm sure if you're interested in painting and you've attempted it, you probably have seen it, right? It's hard to put your finger on all the colors that you might see in clouds at any one time, because there's tons of color. And sometimes it makes no logical sense whatsoever. Oops, color's getting a little muddy there. Okay. All right, and we'll get some of that in the water. Good. Now, what I'm going to do before I get too far along, I'm going to put some of the shadow shapes along the bank, and then I'm going to put the highlights in on the grass and the trees, and I'll probably call it a night, feeling like I'll get it close enough where I can rest well, feeling that I did what I set out to do. So I'm going to mix up what I have here using my brush. I already have some Van Dyke Brown and some Payne's Gray in there. I'm going to get a bluish brown, which will look, based upon its value, most likely not too far from black relative to the other colors that you see here. And we'll probably have to thin it out because the lines that I put in are going to be pretty thick with this brush, but we're going to just try and create the indication of this deeper shadow within the bank. And there you're seeing evidence of the difficulty that can come into play when you're trying to put darks over lights. Much easier to apply lighter colors over dark colors for the most part. So yes, a little bit of a mistake on my part. I rushed, and that happens. There's a couple ways you can overcome that. If you're not familiar, you could use your palette knife. You could scrape the paint off. You could apply the paint over the top using the palette knife. There's a number of ways you can overcome this. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to struggle here. I'm going to let the colors kind of work together. And we'll see where it goes. And if need be, I'll just scrape it off. And this is thick right now. These shapes are thicker than what we'll ultimately want, but we're going to come over the top selectively and once again build some shapes within the shapes to help hopefully make that look a little bit more like the actual banks themselves. We're going to get some darker shadows toward the bottom of what this is supposed to resemble, a stone row. We're going to break up some of those lines a little bit. And we're going to do the same here at the bottom of this brush line. Okay, I'm going to get just some shapes in, maybe indicating that there's some brush here, casting the shadow. And we'll get some highlights on these so they don't look quite as flat as they do right now in just a little bit. We got maybe the indication of a slightly taller tree there, maybe there. Kind of breaking that plane a little bit. There we go. a few really dark lines here in the water, which will blur out. We want this to go as close to horizontal as we can, indicating maybe the water's flowing. And then, there we go. Okay. Let's break up some of these shapes a little bit too, and see if we can get some directional shapes, hopefully drawing the viewer's eyes into the middle of the painting and around the painting a little bit. Okay, so I'm gonna put that down, and I'm gonna go in to grab my larger round brush. Actually, you know what? I'm gonna take this smaller. I think this was a bright at one point in time, but it's so beat up and used and mistreated. I don't know what it is. It could be a round brush. And I'm gonna wring out whatever excess paint I can, and I'm gonna start mixing up a much lighter tone of this sap green. And I might get a little bit of blue in there. There we go. And we're gonna start selectively laying that in. This might be a pasture field with some longer grass. I know, Bannister did spend a lot of time in Connecticut, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, in areas where there was farming. And he painted a lot of farm scenes and scenes where there were cows grazing. So I suspect, that might be a little bit of what was going on in this field. And you can see I'm playing with the shapes a little bit. Create a little bit more blue. Trying to create the indication of depth. Maybe there's little spots where you can get an indication of those fields cutting in behind. Especially toward the edges of that little stand of trees. There we go. And a little bit of raw sienna and green. And some white. And build up some more highlights here and there. Now I'm going to go clean this up a little bit. I'm going to get some highlights on the trees, do a little bit of work on the water, and we're going to wrap this up. And I might do some more touch-ups in the morning, but I actually have a 7 a.m. appointment for work. So I want to make sure that I drink my tea, get to bed, and have ample rest so I could do my job in the morning. But just getting some indications, thinking along the lines of shapes and how the sky might be lighting up some of these trees. Same here. There we go. And then finally, I'll use the flat brush or a palette knife. I guess I'll go with the flat brush. I'm going to get some indication, mixture of Van Dyke brown and raw sienna and some white, of some highlights on these stone rows. So we'll get a mixture of some browns and earth tones and some grays in there toward the top. Try not to be too precious or careful, and just slap it in. Again, check out on your favorite search engine, look up Edward Bannister. Quite an interesting character. There's a lot to this gentleman and his painting. More than I'm capable of sharing. I am not an art historian, but he was recommended as somebody that I might want to study by somebody on my channel some time ago, and definitely glad I checked it out. All right. Covered some additional works of his. If you were to search for Edward Bannister on my channel, you'll find it pretty easily. All right, now I'm going to fuss a little bit with the water, and we'll wrap up. So I'm going to get some highlights in here, almost pure white, kind of a grayish blue white. And I might break out the palette knife to help out with this a little bit. And I'm going to avoid putting in the reeds this evening. I might put them in tomorrow. That might be one thing that I work on tomorrow. Do is grab a dry chip brush, and I'm just gonna gently blend maybe I'll pull down a little bit too here, just like this. All right, well, there you go. That's all I'm going to do for this evening. You know, once again, covering Ed Bannister. And for the life of me, I can't recall the name of this painting. I had it in my notes earlier, but had a little bit of a hectic evening. But essentially covered this painting of his. Still some work to do here. It's not an exact scientific replication, but you can see most of the basic shapes are in. Some refinements needed in order to get it a little bit closer. But, you know, you can understand why his work was appreciated. The strength of his ability to simplify a relatively complicated scene. There is a certain amount of color harmony. It is a tonalist style painting for sure. Works together nicely. Definitely kind of evokes feelings of a peaceful, mostly cloudy day in a meadow, perhaps maybe overlooking a distant series of meadows from the other side of a riverbank or a pond or what have you. So hope you enjoyed. Again, it's Edward Bannister. He is a painter that lived in the 1800s, passed away in 1901. He was of African-American descent, born in Canada, lived in New England most of his life, and deservedly is a coveted North American painter, and has some beautiful works like this. perhaps maybe we'll cover more in the future, and I'll definitely keep working on this throughout the next day or so in order to bring it a little bit closer to where I want it to be. But I appreciate you checking out my channel and my video. Hi from Michigan. Yeah, good for you. Beautiful time of year in Michigan, that's for sure. Maybe even a little bit colder than it is here in northeastern Pennsylvania. But again, just covering this beautiful Ed Bannister painting. Very quick and rough copy. Hope you enjoyed. Hope you check out some more of my work. I have a long-term series that I call Study the Greats. So, I cover a lot of tonalist painters and some others as well. George Inness, Charles Warren Eaton, Edward Bannister, and many, many others, but also some Monet and several others. So check that out. You could look at that playlist if you're interested, and then also I have my original works as well. Lately, been doing a lot of work in watercolor, and that's why I started out with a quick kind of spotlight of my watercolor journal and my journaling efforts. This has been a real convenient, low-cost way for me to keep painting throughout some busy, busy winter months here. In any event, thanks again. Thanks for joining. I hope you stay well. Hope to see you again sometime soon. Take care.